Our next step is we're going to take and put this horse in a rig. I don't know what to call it, but I call it the sidelines, where it resembles. It's the same principle as a German martingale would be. And what I'm going to do is show you how to ride a horse without getting on his back. Okay, so we're going to condition him to arc his neck and supple his neck, and to round his back, and how to maneuver himself in a bit. Okay, so you know, you see a lot of people, they call bitting a horse, where they tie their head back and they tie their head down with a shank bit and all that to get the horse given to the bit. But what I'm going to do here is to show you a way that I have developed over many, many years of observation and trial and error of how to do this in a very humane, very polite way, to where this horse can give himself release, and he will learn to yield and release to his own pressure. So what you're going to want to do before we do this, you're going to hobble him, and you're going to want to tie him in the rig that I did in a former video that's on hobbling. So go back to that video and watch it before you do this. You do not want to do this until you've accomplished vertical flexion, lateral flexion, and you get this horse to where he's softening and yielding first. You never want to tie a horse up and confine him to where he's not yielding, because that's going to get you in a ruckus that you can't get out of sometimes. So my bit here in my rig is, I call it a half-breed, where it's got a bit and then a nose piece. And that nose piece is real nice because that kind of resembles the holder here that he's used to. So I've been working him in hand with this holder, so he's used to giving to that nose pressure, okay? So now what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to transition him from nose pressure to mouth pressure. So that's what this bit's all about. So as I put pressure on the bit, it tugs on his nose before it does in his mouth. And if he does get bracy or wants to pull against this, it's going to pull against his nose and not in his mouth entirely. Because some horses, I mean, they are so resistant to brace. Oh my goodness, they'll pull against that thing like you can't imagine. So you don't want that to happen. So you want to try to set him up for success, not failure. And then here, I've got a piece of it's cord that I bought at the hardware store. It's about, I'd say 12 feet long, 13 feet long. It's just clothesline cord that I use, nothing fancy, okay? So what I'll do is I'm gonna take Boots here, and I'm gonna bridle him, okay? Now it's important that when you do this, if anything you're doing is not working, you got to back up. You can't skip any steps. So if he did not want to bridle softly, that tells me, well, we're not going to go any further until we can at least get the bridle on softly. If he won't stand here obediently, well, I can't do anything else till we get that established. So as you can see, he's got a good way about him, and I feel good about this. So up underneath his girth here, you can't see it, but there's like a snap, a big snap like this that allows this rope to slide through very freely, okay? That's very important. We rigged this thing 100 different ways, and I've had more gadgets made and used bungee cords and surgical tubing and bought different rigs here and there, but what I found, this right here, works the absolute very best. I come up here to the saddle. This saddle doesn't have a ring right here for the breast collar. This has got a pulling collar, so I'm going to hook this right in here, my first string, right here. Like this, all right? And I want that first level to be at the same angle as your hands are going to be with your reins eventually. So I don't want to tie it down low because that's a different angle than my hands are going to be. So I'm setting this up to simulate my hands. So when I put him in a German martingale here, he will be able to very freely move around with that martingale. I come through the ring underneath his girth. I come through the ring on the bit. Okay. And then I come back to here like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up to a tautness to where he sets his head where it's supposed to be. His vertical is straight up and down. There's no pressure in his mouth, there's no pressure on his nose, and that's his place where I want his head to be. That's his place, his natural headset, and that'll be his sanctuary now, okay? So I don't want him to have any pressure in his mouth. I don't want him to have anything going on, but absolute comfort and absolute release at this where I want his head to be while I'm riding. So now, watch him. See, he's a conditioned horse, so he's been through all this before. But now sometimes when you do this, or most of the time, you'll get a backyard horse that is really resistive to pressure. And he's used to people, when he feels pressure in his mouth, he's supposed to back up. So he'll start backing, or he'll want to pull against that rig because he's used to people with brutal hands. So what we're doing here is we're not getting excited at all. We're being very quiet, very still. And I want you to look at those bottom strings on how they're loose. Well, see, he's giving himself release. He's yielding to himself. See there? So, okay, you see how he just did right there? And he gave himself release. It's important to point out that you do not, I don't want to walk him off. I don't want to do anything until he has discovered this on his own, okay? So sometimes when I hook this up right at first, I might just go do something else. I might leave him here. I'll go to the bathroom, or I'll go get me a drink, and I'll just let him soak a little bit. And then I'll come back and he'll have his head down and he'll have his head put right in that spot. But I want you to look, this is a good angle for you to see those angles right there. That if he puts his head up or if he puts his head down, he's going to get pressure. But if he puts his head right where it's supposed to be, he finds release. So he finds his own place. There aren't many riders that can accomplish this on a horse's back. And what this also does is it will prevent him from tossing his nose and rooting through the bit. So if you get a horse that's kind of rooting around, used to pulling the reins out of people's hands, this is a good way to get that worked out, okay? So now what I'm going to do, okay, see right there how important that is. When he looks around, that ring underneath his girth allows him to get that lateral flexion. It used to be, I'd tie that thing stationary underneath there, but when he turned his head, he couldn't get lateral movement. But the way this is set up, he can turn and get lateral movement. And I just want to point out, and I'll show you here in a future video here real soon, this is the exact same way we're going to use the German martingale when we go to ride him at first, okay? So I'm not going to push him hard because I got to teach him to turn with his neck and his head. Come on, come on. See there how he turned and kept his head in place. An ignorant horse that hasn't been conditioned properly, he's going to turn and want to throw his head up. But see, we got to teach our horses to turn while they're still in collection. I don't want him turning with his head up. I want him rounding his back, and I want him to see his vertical, which is his forehead, okay? See how straight up and down his forehead is. Okay, see here? But see, I've taught this horse how to free lunge before I hooked this rig on. So in our last video, I worked on transitions without this rig on. Because if you hook this up at first without getting him to where he's controllable, unhooked, you got problems, okay? But I want you to see how pleasantly he's going along. This horse is in collection in my opinion. You know, he's got his neck supple, his poll is soft, and I want you to look at his jaw. See how he's flexing his jaw? And when he walks, he's stepping in the right spots. He's arcing his back, okay? So watch when I turn him, okay? See how he steps over, and he didn't tug against those strings at all. Now, if I cracked this flag and got after him, he'd tug against those strings, and I don't want him to do that. Because my goal is, I'm going to try to ride this horse just as softly as I'm working him right here. And I'm going to try to let him find his own release with my hands, okay? So when you're going down a trail, and there's nobody I know that wouldn't prefer to ride a horse in a soft rein like this down the trail. Well, this is where it starts, right here. We're teaching him to walk softly and to yield to that bit.